What is up, weather enthusiasts? I'm your host, Pat's Path Predictor. Let's get right into the weather. Alright, so here's the situation we have for you, ladies and gentlemen. We have a lot to talk to you about today as we continue to look at a lot of the stuff that's going on in the Eastern Pacific and a few other parameters we are watching in the Atlantic for future tropical development. So we're going to be talking about those today. So we're going to mainly be diving pretty much right into what we're looking at right here. We're going to go ahead and start with what's been going on in the Eastern Pacific because we now have 3 areas of interest that we're going to be watching and we're going to be taking a very quick look at right here. So let's go ahead and start with the first one, which is this one, which is Invest 92L. Then we can move on to actually let's start with Invest 91L and then move to 92L. Actually not LE, well before we move to 92E. But here's what we got. Showers and thunderstorms associated with a broad area of low pressure located several hundred miles southwest of the southwestern coast of Mexico have changed a little in organization for much of the day. However, gradual development of the system is expected, and a tropical depression is likely to form over the weekend or early next week while the system moves northwestward at about 10 miles per hour, 70% chance of formation in the next 48 hours. 80% in the next 7 days, so we're going to be paying attention to that right there and seeing how that situation evolves. The next area of interest that we're watching is Invest 92E right here. Let's go ahead and briefly talk about this. This now is a 90% chance of formation in the next 7 days. This is likely going to develop either today or tomorrow. Showers and thunderstorms associated with a trough of low pressure located several hundred miles southwest of the Gulf of Tehuantepec. I can't pronounce that. I do apologize for that. Continue to show signs of organization. Environmental conditions are conducive for further development, and a tropical depression or storm is expected to form this weekend as the system moves west-northwestward at 10 to 15 miles per hour. Locally, heavy rains are possible along portions of the southwestern coast of Mexico during the next couple of days, and interest there should monitor the progress of the system. For additional information on this system, including gale warnings, please see the high seas forecast system issued by the National Weather Service. 80% probability of formation in the next 48 hours, 90% probability in the next 7 days. So that's the second area of interest we're paying attention to. And then just last night, they tagged another area of interest right here. This is what we have going on right here. It's pretty crazy in the Eastern Pacific right here. This is the kind of stuff that we're probably going to be seeing in the Atlantic within the next couple of months right here, seeing multiple areas of interest that are getting tagged over and over and over again. But here we go. An area of low pressure is forecast to develop late next week south of southern Mexico. Environmental conditions appear conducive for some gradual development of the system as it moves west-northwestward. 20% chance of formation in the next 7 days. So those are all factors that we're going to be paying attention to. And we're actually going to go ahead and go to satellite now and shift to the Eastern Pacific to see what we're potentially looking at. All right, we're back at satellite imagery, and now we will go ahead and go to the Eastern Pacific region right here just to kind of show you what we're looking at right here. So here's what we have going on. We do have a little bit of convection starting to fire up over here across Invest 91E right here. You're starting to notice more convection starting to bubble up near the center of circulation. Also, I'm noticing a little bit of a healthier outflow band on the southern side of the tropical wave that's organizing right now. And then you have 92E, which is showing more signs of organization. You're seeing more concentrated and long-lasting convection. You're seeing less that what I like to call popcorning convection, which is kind of just convection that just kind of popcorns, convex and then starts increases, then decreases, and it does that over and over and over and over and over again as it tries to evolve. But now we're seeing more concentrated areas of convection. It's kind of trying to sustain itself. So that's stuff that you're going to want to pay attention to and keep a very close eye on. right here, and I do believe 92E will pose some threat to land. I mean, it already is arguably, mainly because of how close the convection is and how the convection is just offshore over here, and how that's going to be affecting kind of the coastal regions over here. So we're going to want to pay very close attention to that as well. Let's go ahead now and move on to the model runs right here. Let's go ahead and show you the European. Here's the 0Z European for today. We're going to be showing that for mainly the Eastern Pacific region right here. We're mainly just going to briefly go over this very quickly. Actually, let's go ahead and shift other regions to the Eastern Pacific, just so that way we can give you a general idea, get a better view of what's looking at. So that's 91E currently. That's this low pressure system, and then you have this low pressure system over here that is 92E that we're watching right here. This low pressure system decreases to about 1,000 millibars right here, and then you have this one that doesn't really get designated as a low pressure system, interestingly enough, according to the European. So that's something that you're going to want to pay attention to. But still, I think both of these could be tropical storms. I mean, tropical storm is expected to develop in the by this weekend, so we're going to want to pay attention to that. But really looking at those pressure gradients, it looks like both of these are about equal in strength, and it looks like a potential Fujiwara effect might be going on, predominantly because of how close they are. Fujiwara effect, for those of you who do not know, is basically when you have two equivalent strength systems kind of start to do a little dance and rotate like cyclonically. So basically they rotate counterclockwise of each other, and it completely can throw off both of their tracks, and in this case it could potentially be affect more people in southern Mexico, because how 91E and 92E are currently oriented, if that Fujiwara effect were to kick in, say, in the next 24 hours, basically 91E would be moving further to the south, I believe the southeast, and 92E would be moving more to the northwest. And ultimately, what you're noticing with that is basically that would ultimately crash 92E into land, and that would not be good for flooding concerns, maybe some wind concerns, obviously, as well. So that's something you're going to want to pay attention to as well. Now we're going to go ahead and move on to the main meat of this video, which I know I was covering the Eastern Pacific for a little bit, but we're going to be moving on to the main meat, which is the Atlantic, and kind of looking at, okay, when is the first area of interest going to develop? When are we going to see that get tagged? And what conditions are favorable for those to happen? So let's go ahead and start right now with the global sea surface temperatures. Then we'll move to the OHC, and then a few other maps as well. So here's what we have going on with the global sea temperatures in the Atlantic. Well, first of all, in the Eastern Pacific, you're looking at 29. You're looking at, what is this, 30 plus degrees Celsius waters right here across much of the southern Mexican coast and parts of Central America and that area right here. That warm water is what's going to ultimately allow for these systems to develop. That and the lack of wind shear in the region that you're going to want to pay attention to. So that's what we're paying attention to, at least in that regard. But that's kind of something we'll be paying attention to mainly on the back burner. But we're looking at with the global sea temperatures. Interestingly enough, it looks like the Gulf region really has cooled down quite a bit over the last couple of days, mainly because there were cold fronts that moved through, mainly because there was a lot of mesoscale convection that developed. So those are things that you're going to want to pay attention to right there. Looking at the SST graph right here, seeing how this happened, we really start to see this peak and max out around 28.8 or 28.9 degrees Celsius, which is equivalent to about 84 degrees Fahrenheit for those of you tuning in on the Gulf Coast. And then it dropped down to 28.6, and I expect that to decrease a little bit more until we start seeing more of a ridge pattern start to build up across much of the Gulf. So we're going to want to pay attention to that as well. But ultimately, you're noticing that it's cooling down a little bit. You're also noticing the areas in parts of the Caribbean cooling down a little bit as well, so you're going to want to keep a very close eye. These water temperatures are going to fluctuate up and down a little bit as maybe cold fronts move through, as maybe you have more mesoscale convection, all of that stuff. but you are going to seeing a pretty big warming trend across a lot of these regions, particularly in the Atlantic Basin, particularly in the main development region, and in the Eastern Caribbean. We're going to want to pay attention to that as well. Another area we're going to be paying attention to is the ocean heat content. Ocean heat content has been pretty interesting to say the very least. Basically, the three main areas I've been paying attention to are the loop current, the whole Caribbean, and the Atlantic Basin. I'm not paying too much attention to the main development region in terms of OHC growth. I am still worried about the OHC that's currently there in the MDR right there, but I'm mainly looking at areas of OHC growth to kind of look at, okay, where's the fastest areas that are growing, and how is this going to impact the rest of the areas too. So those are things you're going to want to pay attention to, and those are things that you're going to want to keep a very close eye out. So what we're looking at right here is, especially in the Western Gulf over the last couple of weeks, they've really been the benefactor of the warmer waters that have been kind of going on, like this huge temperature surge that we noticed from May all the way up to early June right here. They've been the biggest benefactor in terms of that OHC surge right here. Because yes, the loop current has already had quite a bit of OHC for it to work with and a lot of capital to play with, but now you have this Western Gulf region that has more capital to play with. You're looking at, before we were looking at a few areas that were not even cracking 50 OHC. Now you're seeing a lot of areas that are over 50 OHC and a lot of areas that are over 75 OHC, and maybe a couple small tiny areas of about 100 OHC in the Western Gulf region that you're going to want to pay attention to. While it may not seem important right now, well, when you have a tropical cyclone that moves through the Gulf and heads towards the Western Gulf region over here, like Texas, Louisiana, those areas, if it taps into this into this increased OHC over here, it's going to definitely sustain it more, definitely going to allow it to intensify more. I mean, think about this for a second. Consider the following. You had Hurricane Milton last year develop in the Western Gulf, and it immediately tapped into the pretty big OHC areas that we had in that region of the Gulf to allow for it to intensify to a pretty monstrous Category 5 hurricane. It officially peaked at 185 miles per hour. Some of us at Storms United think it was around 190, 195 miles per hour. We're going to have to wait and see what the data is and how it happened going forward. But by and large, it used that OHC to really allow for it to explosively intensify and really catch a lot of people off guard. And we could see a similar situation to that this hurricane season because of the OHC. Other area I'm watching is pretty much the Caribbean region as well. You're noticing a lot more OHC developing in the northwestern Caribbean, as well as more in the Eastern Caribbean as well. Before, we were seeing a few isolated spots, basically, that weren't seeing too much over 75. Now you're seeing more areas of 75 plus OHC across much of the Eastern Caribbean. Then you're looking at the Atlantic Basin, which, based on the latest change that we're noticing right here, basically what you're seeing is a lot more OHC in the Atlantic Basin. You're seeing it expand a lot more to the north as well. Same with the main development region. As that ITCZ moves further to the north, that OHC is ultimately going to allow for more convection to initiate, and that's something we're going to want to pay attention to. So that's kind of a deep analysis as to what we're looking at with sea surface temperatures. Let's go ahead and briefly take a look at the wind shear right now. Let's go ahead and pull that up, move the regions over to the North Atlantic, and we will be pulling up 200 to 850 millibar wind shear, as well as the anomalies, as we've been doing previously, just to kind of give you a general gist as to what we're looking at. So here's what we have with the Europeans with the 0Z right here. So here's what we're looking at right here, mainly generally unfavorable conditions across much of the Atlantic. That's really not that surprising. It's early June. That's typically what you would expect. But here's what we're looking at right here. I'm noticing, at least right now, I'm noticing that the wind shear is going to decrease by a decent margin across much of the main development region. You're going to start seeing that wind shear move further up to the north, and you're going to see a pretty big pocket of low wind shear affect much of the region starting about 9 days out. Or so actually, no, starting about 7 days out, and then by 9 days out, things get a bit more interesting right here. Yes, wind shear fluctuates up and down, up and down, up and down, and we're going to want to pay attention to that. But by and large, you're noticing a decrease of wind shear, and you're noticing that wind shear pocket really start to take shape over here across much of the main development region. That and the moisture increase are why I'm so concerned about that region, especially going into late June. So we're going to want to pay attention to that as well. Looking at the wind shear anomalies, taking a quick gander at those. Wind shear anomalies are pretty interesting to take a look at. So here's what we're seeing right now. We're seeing wind shear anomalies basically they're at their peak. At least below average peak is over the northwestern Atlantic Ocean over here. That's been pretty typical. That's kind of shown to what we've been seeing with the charts right here. Actually, never mind. This doesn't really have that availability right now, but we can see with the charts from yesterday how that there's this really low wind shear over here that kind of correlates with that below average shear over there across parts of the northwestern Atlantic. But watch what happens over the next few days. Watch what happens as we're starting to notice about 8 days out or so, the averages really start to decline across much of the main development region, and there's this huge broad pocket right here of below average wind shear as these higher wind shear totals push further and further to the north. Right here, that's something you're going to want to pay attention to. You're seeing less wind shear in the tropics right there, and that's a very big concern, especially going later into the hurricane season, say late June or much of July, when that wind shear starts to fluctuate, goes up, down, up, down, up, down, then starts seeing that general trend of a decrease. Climatologically speaking, the second half of July is when we've noticed that, at least recently. But ultimately, if you start seeing these below average shear returns, that could ultimately accelerate that below average that wind shear decline pretty precipitously, and we don't want to see that, especially for tropical development. We don't want to see tropical development obviously affect anyone at land, so you're going to want to pay attention to these returns right here. Let's go ahead now and show you the moisture content right here. What's going on with this? So here's what we have with the moisture right here. Typically, you have dry air across much of the main development region, mainly due to the Sahara Dust that's currently over there. We're going to want to focus on that. But I am noticing that we've seen less Sahara Dust here than we did last year by a pretty considerable margin across much of the MDR, the subtropics, those areas as well. So that's what we have going on. And then you have another plume of Sahara Dust that's going to be moving through the main development region, and then you start to see a pretty decent moisture pocket start to move through parts of the MDR, and we're going to want to pay attention to that as well. You are seeing more Sahara Dust moving through as well. As this high pressure system remains relatively strong, you have been seeing kind of some returns of low pressure that's going to kind of been moving through and kind of showing up on the model right here. But by and large, it's been kind of scattered right there. And what a low pressure ultimately does is it drives more of that Sahara Dust towards Europe compared to the subtropical Atlantic, which is kind of the time when you have this tropical development. It's kind of when the MDR is quote unquote open for business, as myself, Weatherset, Nazario, and a lot of others will tend to tell you. But ultimately, you're noticing a bit more moisture coming on from the ITCZ as well as the Sahel region. We're looking at a lot more moisture in the Sahel region compared to what we were seeing last year. Here's what we are seeing now with the moisture anomalies right here. So we're paying attention to that as well. We're basically seeing a lot more moisture than average, not just in the main development region, but by and large across the entire Atlantic right here. And that's very concerning as a forecaster to look at, because yes, you do see more Sahara Dust moving through. You do see those below average returns in terms of moisture that are coming back, but you do see a moisture surge across much of the MDR, at least in terms of the anomalies. That does kick off quite a bit, and you're going to want to pay attention to that as well. And yes, you're going to see more Sahara Dust. You're going to see more Sahara Dust outbreaks. But looking at them, they're far less intense than they were last year. And we'll have to continue to monitor these, and we're going to have to continue to update you here on the Pat's Path Predictor channel with those, because if the trends are looking at what we're looking at and the way that things are going, we could see a scenario where we could see, maybe some unexpected development happen over the course of the next few months, and we do not want to see that. And we'll continue to look at more stuff tonight on our live stream, which is at 7 p.m. Central Time, 8 p.m. Eastern Time, here on the Pat's Path Predictor channel with Storms United, so be sure you stay tuned for that. But with that being said, we're going to go ahead and close the video out right here. Be sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel if you are new. The goal, as always, is to get more people engaged with weather. If you want to hang out, ask questions, or you want to help us out, be sure to join the Storms United Discord server. The link to that is in the end screen. And with that being said, have a wonderful day, guys. Stay safe.